Hi everyone, this is Molly from EGM, and as you are watching here, I got the chance recently to go hands-on with From Software's upcoming Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. Now, of course, this is coming, following their original Demon Souls, which kind of kicked off this Souls series. Then we got the Dark Souls games, and of course, Bloodborne. And now Sekiro is coming, and it is a kind of a Soulsborne game, but it's also not. And so I'm going to talk about some of my thoughts having played the game and also go over a few things that you're going to be seeing here, which, first of all, is this location, the dilapidated temple. Now, kind of like the original Demon Souls and Bloodborne, Sekiro is going to have a hub area, which you're going to come back to. There's going to be NPCs here that can help teach you things and maybe improve your weapons, give you new options, so on and so on. But what's interesting here in Sekiro is that this hub is actually part of the overall world. Now, you didn't necessarily see that, but this area I'm in here right now that you're watching, I got here by straight up just going kind of out the front gate of that temple and then going a little ways. So it's part of the world. You can warp back to it. You can warp to it, away from it, but you can also just straight up walk there if you want to. So we're seeing some initial combat in the game, and you're going to see a kind of funny thing here is that I didn't know how to pick up money at first. And what was interesting was there's a text box explaining how to do it. You have to hold in, I think it was the square button, but you have to actually hold it in, and then the main character kind of like vacuums up items near him. But it didn't explain at that point, so I was not sure how to get it. So for anybody who is not completely familiar, Sekiro, like I was saying, is taking some of those kind of Dark Souls, Bloodborne ideas, but it's also, and I don't necessarily want to say it's going back completely to Tenchu, because From Software didn't make Tenchu, they helped to release it, but it does feel like going back to those days when From Software as a name you might have had more association with like a Tenchu game versus a kind of medieval or dark Victorian kind of stuff. So one of the main things that you're going to see in that kind of way in Sekiro is that there's a lot more options for stealth, for being stealthy, for sneaking around enemies versus just encountering them head on. Also for going behind them and killing them. And you're going to see in a second here, I'm going to take out these guards by going around kind of the back way and then jumping down to get them. And here a second here. So you're going to have more of those kind of like stealth option kind of kills, which is an interesting dynamic, and I'm going to get into it a little bit later on, but it gives Sekiro an interesting feeling that definitely does set it apart from Dark Souls and Bloodborne and Demon Souls, and even Nioh, because it was kind of funny because some people, including myself, were wanting to see what could From Software do with a kind of, historic Japan-focused Dark Souls game. And then Koei Tecmo comes along and gives that to us in Nioh. But this and Nioh feel very, very different. And that's one of the things that really stood out to me was this isn't just From Software's Nioh. There's a lot of actual differences. So now you're going to see here, of course, one of the main mechanics that has been talked about is the death system. And so when you die, if you have a certain item, then you can be revived on the spot. And there will be sometimes reasons you might want to do that. For example, if you die, the enemies, their attention on you is reset, so they'll kind of like start wandering away and not remember you were there anymore. So if you get overwhelmed, it is an option. But the downside to that is that if you do have to just straight up fully die and then get resurrected back at one of the checkpoints, think bonfires in Dark Souls, you are going to have a permanent loss of half your XP, which can be a really big, penalty if you're even if you are ready for it or if you aren't, either way. Now, there is going to be another option for resurrection. That it's something called Unseen Aid. And I can tell you what I know about it, but it's still kind of a little bit of a secretive thing. That there will be kind of, if you want to think of it as like a God's blessing, that you might be brought back even if you don't have the resources to bring yourself back. But there may then be consequences to that, because basically the Unseen Aid kind of takes power from the environment, from the people around you, and if you die too often and rely on Unseen Aid too often, then you're basically starting to poison the world. And one example that I saw was that one of the main characters I had contact with actually started getting sick because I had used, or I'd received, that Unseen Aid a few times. Now, what that's going to mean in the long term, that's going to be a question to see. Now, this part I wanted to show you because you just saw me pick up a new prosthetic tool. And another of the main kind of focuses of Sekiro is that our main character has this prosthetic arm that he received after his real one got cut off. Kind of funny that this is coming around the same time as Devil May Cry 5, which has that kind of similar idea. So you come back to this main character at the temple, and he's the one who actually made the prosthetic arm for you. Or not necessarily for you, he made it and then he gave it to you. But as he's saying here, he's kind of going over some of the kind of ideas for what your prosthetic arm may get upgrade-wise. And so we're going to see him do the first one here now. So when you find the tools, you can't necessarily use them right away. You have to bring them back to him. He'll sit you down, do the work on your arm, add them in, and as we're seeing right now, he's giving us the loaded shuriken, which will give you kind of, a throwing star option to your arm that you can use as a projectile weapon. And a few of the other ones, I got a chance to play around with was the loaded axe, which is a kind of heavier, more blunt force weapon that can break through certain enemies blocking or shields or things like that. There was the flame vent, which is this kind of like a sort of ish flamethrower thing that you can do kind of fire damage and then be like a short range blast. And so you can have up to 3 prosthetic tools to this point. So this is early in the game, so I've only got this first one. But then you get more, and then you can come back and you can decide which ones. You can swap certain ones in and out. But as we're seeing right here, is that you can't just use them. And it's not necessarily spells or miracles from the Dark Souls series. At the point of Dark Souls 3 where it was kind of an MP bar, you have to have a certain amount of resources here in Sekiro in order to use those tools. And so you'll have to kind of think a little more carefully about what you want to use when. You can't just spam these items. So this is going to lead to something interesting. And this is something that wasn't necessarily knowing was going to be in the game. I should say too, by the way, in terms of your pathetic arm, there are other things like the grappling hook that you'll be able to use whenever. It's not not necessarily something you have to have slotted in all the time. So there are going to be other tools as well. So okay, so she gave us this bell, and so we come back to the temple and talk to the, the sculptor. That's what I was trying to think of. And in this room, there's this Buddha statue that when you first come here, he tells you to be very careful with and to not disturb or break or anything. And what I'm going to do here is after talking to him, I'm going to take the bell over and give it as an offering to the Buddha statue. So take it over, give it as an offering, and you can see this little cutscene here real quick. So this is kind of leading into an interesting part of the story that none of us who got to play the game are totally clear on yet. But we know that when things start off, this kind of main character isn't completely remembering who he used to be and what his life was before a certain point. And so what we see here is that by offering that bell to the Buddha statue, we've changed to a different location. But it's not only going to be a different location, it's going to be a different time. So what this, of course, initially made me think of was the Archstones in Demon Souls. That was obviously the case where you had the kind of the nexus there, and then the Archstones were how you actually got to the game, but different places, where obviously there's a lot of world already existing in Sekiro that you can run around to and go to, but then you're going to use that Buddha statue to travel to what seems to be, at least if, this is an indicator of what the other ones are going to be, to different pieces of your past that will serve a dual purpose. There'll be, new areas for you to explore that can be different, because the main area from what we saw, from the impression I got, was that the team at From Software is trying to kind of have the big interconnected world like we saw originally back in Dark Souls, the first one. So this offers them a way to have some very, very different locations without having to figure out how those would connect to each other. But it's also going to be more storytelling than, we might kind of be used to from the Soulsborne games. So he's saying here that he doesn't remember this, but it was obviously in the past. We know it's 3 years ago. So what is this going to mean for the character? What revelations is it going to give? So one of the things about Sekiro really is that you're going to have, it seems to be a lot more storytelling, and I don't want that to make it seem like there's going to be a ton of cutscenes and a ton of dialogue to get through. But when we're coming from Dark Souls, where almost all the storytelling players really had to dig for, had to, explore for and find themselves, even in the case of item descriptions and whatnot. Sekiro seems like it's going to be putting more of that story up front and center, which is interesting. So here you can see, like, I'm trying to start this encounter by, staying back in the shadows, being a little bit more stealthy, going that kind of, the old school Tenchu style of gameplay. Now, I do want to be clear, though, like, I don't necessarily, and this is coming from what I played, obviously it could change further in the game when you get more, Shinobi tools and you upgrade your character more and whatnot. But this wasn't like a stealth game. There are stealth elements a lot more than we've seen in any previous Soulsborne game, but it isn't necessarily Tenchu. It isn't necessarily entirely based around stealth with a lot of super deep stealth options. It is these things are tools there to help you, but you have to be a little realistic in kind of what your expectations are, I would say. But expectations were interesting with this game, and that's kind of like one of the big things I came away with, is that whether or not this makes sense, is that Sekiro both is more of a Dark Souls game than I thought it was going to be, and it's less of a Dark Souls game than I thought it was going to be. Again, I have to go back to Nioh, where Nioh wasn't just a Dark Souls clone, but that was close to what you thought you might get if Dark Souls tried to do that ancient Japan thing. Like it did feel kind of familiar to you as a Dark Souls fan. Whereas Sekiro has times that it doesn't feel familiar, and even getting into some battles, like what just happened and what I'm going to get into here, the battles play out differently than I was expecting. I don't think you can come into it with a Dark Souls mentality and have it completely work. I would say it's a little bit more, Bloodborne, because there definitely is more of a, you need more of like a forward momentum. You need more attack versus defense. You can't, we get into this kind of mindset with Dark Souls, at least depending on how you play, is, hold your shield up, block attacks, do your roll, very, very calculated, very slow. And that's not to say that Sekiro is a button masher, because it's not, but it's not that kind of slower, more methodical, more thoughtful combat, at least in what I took from it. Is you do have to come to it with a little more of an action-oriented mentality. And if you don't, then you can get surrounded very, very easily. And don't, this is exact counts or something we have to go back and check, but I felt like I was getting into a lot bigger fights here in Sekiro than I would in a Dark Souls or even a Bloodborne at times. Like, it felt like I was getting grouped up on a lot more often. And finally, one thing I want to show you, this is kind of going back to the story, is there's this eavesdropping option, and I played the game total for maybe like an hour and a half or so, and I saw this option a few times, and it's really interesting, and like I don't understand yet the full purpose of why it's here. Like, why are you able to eavesdrop on the enemies? So I'm curious to see, like, is that ever going to offer a strategic advantage in some way? You're gonna like to hear what they're saying and then know how to plan your next moves. So anyway, this has been just a very quick look at Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. I had a lot of fun with my time in it, but it's also, like I said, it was different than I was expecting in a number of ways, and so I'm really excited to see how it turns out, and I hope you had fun watching me play the game.